Alright, what's up guys? Brian here, and this is my Impact Wrestling review for last night's episode of Impact. My thoughts on last night's episode was not really, exciting as far as an episode is concerned. There were things that were set up for next week's show, and I have a bit of a side news on one of the matches that's supposed to be taking place next week, but I'll get into that when I discuss it. So let's just get right into it. We started off with a recap of last week where Ishimori won the X Division Championship. LAX became the tag champions last week, defeating OVE. And of course, Dan Lambert defeated James Storm last week, if you remember, in that career versus career match, which wasn't even a match at all. It was just American Top Team getting involved, KM getting involved, becoming a new member, and Dan Lambert winning and retiring James Storm. And this week we started off with Dan Lambert, Lashley coming out, Lambert gloating about his big victory over James Storm last week. He then announced KM. He brought up KM, and he kind of made Lashley mad a little bit with saying that this was a guy, KM was a guy who did something that not even Lashley could do, and that was put down James Storm. KM came out, basically just talked about himself, saying how Lashley told him to prove himself if he wants to be a part of American Top Team. He single-handedly took out Moose last week, all this stuff, and then Moose came out. He went after KM, and then Lashley got after Moose, attacked him. Then Eddie Edwards would come out, and this would end with Moose and Eddie Edwards chasing away Lashley, KM, and Dan Lambert, and this kind of set up a tag team match for the main event of later on in the night, and I'll get into that in just a moment, in a little bit. My thoughts on this whole, hopefully, my thought on this whole American Top Team storyline they have going on. Hopefully there's going to be an end point in the future for this. As much as I enjoy seeing Dan Lambert on television as the heel guy and American Top Team as this heel group, it's getting kind of repetitive with the same thing week after week, and stuff like that. But hopefully there's an end point in the future for this storyline. But we'll have to wait and see. Let's see what else. We had the EC3 Open Challenge. EC3 came out. He is the current Impact Grand Champion. He talked about Matt Sydal, how Matt Sydal is a choke artist, all this stuff. He started basically talking bad about Matt Sydal. He then issued an open challenge. He didn't care who it was that answered. Canadian Destroyer Petey Williams would come out and answer the challenge. Pretty much this matchup was just a way of continuing this whole Matt Sydal and EC3 feud they have going on, as Matt Sydal would get involved in this match, causing the disqualification loss for Petey Williams. EC3 won this match via disqualification, but obviously this was a match just to continue that whole feud with Sydal and EC3. Sydal would then, once again, like he did last week, basically say in a backstage interview thing, saying that if EC3 wants to prove that he's the man, he'll face him in a 60-minute match. No judges, no rounds, just a straight-up one-on-one. And if he can beat him, he'll shake his hand, hug him, and say he's the man. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. I like this feud. I think these two could put on, if they do away with the judges, do away with the rounds. I think these two could have an awesome matchup. But like I said, we'll have to wait and see. So it is what it is, and I have I've given my thoughts about the Grand Championship. I think they should have just did it with just one-on-one matches, no rounds, kind of the same way that Matt Sydal says about it. I kind of feel the same way. I think they could have they could have created the title and then just have it as a championship, but maybe not have with where you have to have judges and have 3 rounds to determine who the champion is going to be. So, but it is what it is. Let's see. We had a promo from Allie, who talked about how Laurel Van Ness, the current Knockouts champion, has called her weak. She attacked her last week, stuff like that. And then she said that things are going to change. Laurel Van Ness was in action last night on Impact. She took on Casey Spinelli, who has been very impressive in her matches that she's had with Impact Wrestling. And she had, once again, another impressive showing against the Knockouts champion. However, she did not come out victorious, as Laurel Van Ness, with the unprettier, defeated Casey Spinelli in a very hard-fought matchup, in my opinion. Allie would come out afterwards and attack Laurel Van Ness, obviously, to continue this feud. The question that people are probably gonna fans of Impact are probably saying that will, and they kind of brought up this question: will Allie be the one to dethrone Laurel Van Ness for that Knockouts title? We'll have to wait and see. Let's see, what else? We had the Eli Drake Championship address. Eli Drake, of course, coming off the heels of his victory last week in New Jersey over Alberto El Patron in that match that they had. They showed highlights of last week. He came out, basically talked about how he defeated Patron. Talked about how Patron feels that he left, he went home, he was sent home, or he was suspended, and he said, Eli Drake brought up about how Patron says about that he's got a namesake to that championship, but Eli Drake proved last week that he's not a paper champion, all this stuff. He then announced that he was going to be in Detroit next week, and he's going to be defending his global championship. And he doesn't care who it's against. If you bring you prove yourself, stuff like that. Alberto Patron, of course, came out saying he'll see him in Detroit next week. He wants another title shot. Johnny Impact did the same thing, came out, said he'll see both of them in Detroit next week. So obviously we have a 3-way match set up for next week in Detroit. Hopefully it's a full match, not highlights of a match, but obviously, with it being in Detroit, they're gonna probably gonna be another highlight match, and that I don't know. I want to see the full match, not just highlights of the match. So, but we'll have to wait and see what it is next week. And then that segment with Eli Drake, Johnny Impact, Alberto Patron ended with Johnny Impact standing tall after wiping out everybody, Drake, Adonis, and Patron, and holding the global championship. But like I said, we'll have to wait and see what happens next week with those 3 individuals. We had let's see what else. We had a 6-man tag team match involving the X Division competitors. It was Trevor Lee, Caleb Conley, and Hakeem Zayn taking on Sanjay Dutt, Garza Jr., and Desmond Xavier. This was an okay match, but this was Mainly this was for to set up for Xavier getting his X Division title shot next week against Ishimori. He picked up the win in this match for his team, and then Ishimori, the current X Division champion, came out and they shook hands, showing a sign of respect. Of course, if you guys remember, at the Super X Cup tournament, or World's X Cup tournament that they had that impacted last year, Desmond Xavier and Ishimori were in the finals of that tournament, and Desmond Xavier defeated Ishimori to win that tournament. Will he be able to do it again next week, but this time for the X Division Championship? Only time will tell, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. I think these two could deliver a great matchup next week. Hopefully, we'll have, like I said, we'll have to wait and see. And then we had the setup for next week's Barbed Wire Massacre 3. OVE destroyed LAX's clubhouse. LAX, Conan, they went to their clubhouse, saw what OVE had done. They basically said, you know what, let's remove the ropes and let's put barbed wire in its place, and let's do Barbed Wire Massacre. And OVE accepted, and that's going to be another match next week, OVE versus LAX. The side news on that match, today I read that Pop TV has deemed that match too violent, so that is going to be airing on Twitch. So for anybody that has Twitch, will be able to see that match on Twitch next week. So obviously Pop TV has deemed that match too violent, and it will not be airing on the program. It won't be airing on the network next week, as it will be airing on Twitch. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. That's the bit of news that I had for that matchup. We also found out that next week Chandler Park, the cousin of Joseph Park, will be taking on Congo Kong. So that'll be an interesting match. That'll get the ratings up. No offense. And then that led us to the main event, which was Lashley and KM taking on Moose and Eddie Edwards. This came about because of what happened at the beginning of last night's show. Okay match, nothing really exciting. The finish had Dan Lambert distracting Eddie Edwards, which allowed KM to pick up the victory. And it was an okay match, but nothing really exciting. And that was pretty much it for last night's episode of Impact. My overall thoughts, like I said, I thought it was okay, nothing exciting. I wouldn't recommend checking it out. It was basically just things. There were matches that were okay. A lot of setup for next week's episode, but overall my thoughts it wasn't an okay. It was an okay show, but nothing really worth checking out. So if you guys watched last night's episode of Impact, let me know what you guys thought of it in the comments below. Hopefully, I cannot wait to see what happens next week. I'm really looking forward to that Ishimori and Desmond Xavier X Division title match. See how that turns out, and we'll have to wait and see if it's going to be the full match with Drake, Patron, and Johnny Impact. And that's pretty much it. So with that being said, this has been my review of what took place on last night's episode of Impact Wrestling on Pop TV. As always, I am Brian, and thank you for watching.